The Awakened Way is a distillation of teachings and a way of living. I learned it from a young man across the veil who left proof that we all are souls. And it is a path to living a consciously connected, divinely guided life. It'll change your life to live by the three principles. And they're very simple. Number one, you're not only human. So what are we, right? And number two, you're part of one big web connecting all that is, not just on this earthly plane, but across multiple dimensions. And number three, the force that's creative and healing, the force that holds everything together is love.
I love that. You hit on proof, right? How do you validate that proof? Like, what is good proof for you that supports that hypothesis that we exist after this human life?
I call them NOEs, no other explanation moments. In the case of the young man named Wolf, who came back to share with us a message that we as a species are out of alignment, out of balance. We're too much in our head and not in our hearts, and we need to learn to balance both. He left proof that he knew he was going to pass, exactly how he was going to pass, which was struck by lightning, where it would happen, and what would happen afterwards. I've written a book about it called Wolf's Message, and there's not a single person that reads it that it doesn't rock their world, because it's an NOE for sure. But I just have thousands of NOEs, and there's just no doubt in my mind, we are not only human.
So can you give the audience, I'm sure there are people that are just, they've heard your story before, but for those that haven't, can you give us like a brief intro into what that looked like?
Sure. You and I were sharing before the recording started that you work in DC now, Washington, DC, and I spent 2 tours of duty in Washington, DC as a Navy officer. Both of those were serving at the highest level, one as an assistant to the head of the Navy, and the second as the aide de camp to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the head of the whole military. I retired as a commander right after being in the last aircraft on 9/11. Well, not right after. I had to still serve 2 more years to have my 20 years in. But that was the catalyst for me saying, life is too short not to live your dreams while you can. So I went off and lived my dream of sailing off into the sunset with my husband for a few years. But that journey was cut very short by the death of my stepdaughter by lightning, just like Wolf. And that started me on this whole different journey that I never expected, to go from very left brain, very rigid, in the box military officer to now out of the box medium, spirit communicator, channeler, but most importantly, spiritual teacher, sharing the awakened way with people. The mediumship is an aside. It's what gives me the validations of the teaching. To me, it's all about teaching other people to understand who we are and how to make your own connection with loved ones who have passed, with higher beings who have guidance for us.
Oh, there's so much in there. Susan's death was the catalyst for your spiritual development, right?
Yeah, Susan was my stepdaughter. In fact, let me show you a picture right here. I always have it right here. She was a sergeant in the Marine Corps.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And
do you still make that connection with her now?
No, I do, but not too often, because I don't need it. She often just kind of shows up here. I feel her to my right side. Just if I call on her, she's there, but it's not that desperate need to know that she was around that led to everything opening.
And she was pregnant with a son, right? And it's fascinating because in the book you talk about how, like, the son was actually, like, I guess, growing like they would here in this physical reality, where, you know, she hadn't even had the baby yet, but yet when you and your husband Ty had a reading with a medium, the baby boy was standing next to him, like, you know, looking up at him and wanted to make a connection. So do we still continue to grow, like, on the other side?
Evolution is what life is all about, whether here or in the hereafter. And you can choose to grow as we would in human form for the purposes of the storyline of Suzanne and Ty and Susan and her son Liam. It would make sense that he would continue to grow, but that was that was the really big life-changing moment in this reading with the medium, when she said, well, she's bringing through all this evidence that Susan was there. There was no denying it was Susan. You could not pull the wool over our eyes, too. My husband's a retired ship captain, destroyer captain, and we were not going to be duped by anybody that was making things up. There was no doubt it was Susan. But when she said she's bringing with her a little baby boy she wants to introduce to you, and the woman had no way of knowing Susan was pregnant with the boy, that was it. But he had grown a little bit. And in fact, so funny, Trey, in an hour, I'm going to be interviewing for my podcast, the medium who brought him through. Sophie Burnham. She's actually the woman who started the whole angel movement in the late 90s. I didn't use her real name in my book, so we're going to out her today.
I got to out her today. That's awesome.
But another medium or psychic who I've had on my podcast, Annette Bricka, when she did a reading for me, she said there's some connection, like you and your husband had to meet. You had to get married because it led to some event, and she hadn't read my book. It led to some event, and it has to do with somebody who was killed in a way you never would have thought of. And there's this male with the number 15 coming up, who had been 15 years at that time since Susan passed, and Liam, her son, would have been 15. So there's that. I'm doing a lot of talking, but that's that progression you talked about, right? He showed up as 15.
Could you connect with Liam now?
I never have, and I never tried. Yeah.
It's fascinating. So you travel a lot. You and Ty travel a lot. I see your Instagram and I see your social medias, and I'm sure you come in contact with a whole bunch of different people with different belief systems. I feel like there's a divergent conceptualization of mediumship, in that there are some that believe that it is a spark to their spiritual path, like I have taken on that belief. And then there are some that think it is essentially the devil trying to trick us into stealing our souls, right?
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I used to have a real wariness of bringing up what I do around people who are have a strong religious belief, because in the past I'd run into people who had that feeling that it's wrong, that it's of the devil, and I know it's not, because I've just helped thousands of people who've told me, you saved my life, you changed my life, and how can that be wrong? Saved my life. And so that was my own BS belief system, that they would somehow think I was wrong. I no longer care what people think of me. I don't try to convince anyone. I completely honor everyone's path. They ultimately will all lead to the same place. And yet we just bought a second home out west, and the neighbors on both sides are very beautiful Christians. And I say my religion is love. Am I a Christian? Yes. I mean, I believe those tenets, but not, we don't need to get into that, not literally like more fundamentalists would, but the basic truths are so beautiful. And yet here they come, we invited them to dinner, and I thought, I wonder what they're going to think if the topic of my work comes up. And because I wasn't guarded about it, because I no longer worry what people will think about me, the conversation came up and it was beautiful. They were interested. It may not be their path, but nobody said, hey, we're leaving. They didn't get up from the table and leave. So it's just when we accept each other where we are with a beautiful sense of openness, there's nothing to push back against.
So beautiful. Challenges of being a human being here are pretty evident. We feel everything. It's very emotional. I mean, there's a whole industry dedicated to anxiety and stress, right? How do we, right, when we know our true nature and what that is, how does that solve some of those challenges?
Oh, well, I'm thrilled that in April, I have a new book coming out with Hay House, and it's called The Awakened Way, Making the Shift to a Divinely Guided Life. That's what's missing, is the conscious guidance that we can tune into at any time. And when we say divine, I don't just mean by God, by our helpers across the veil. And that can be loved ones who pass. That can be guides and angels. There are just legions of helpers waiting for us to ask. And it's one of the greatest messages of hope I can give everybody, that we are not alone. We are so not alone. And that's what causes the anxiety, thinking we are, feeling isolated from each other. And social media doesn't help that. It actually adds to it. So the promise of the awakened way and the exercises and the truths in the book are you can learn to shift your consciousness to the greater part of you, your higher self, call it your soul, that is right here. You don't access it when you die. When you can learn to shift in the midst of the drama, you find a whole different state of awareness that is peace at its very core.